"Don't worry, Dad, you've earned a rest." Then he slammed the door and locked it. I stood there in the dark, trapped like a dog in the same basement where I'd taught him to ride out storms. He slid a plate of food under the door later, like I was an animal, and told me he was selling the house and moving my money. My own son. But what he didn't know was that Martha left me something he never noticed. Something tucked away that would bury him. Not me. And once I got it into the right hands, let's just say his signature wasn't the only thing forged. My name is Walter Hale, and I'm 75 years old. Each morning I sit in my paid-off home, savoring percolator coffee while the familiar floorboards settle into their daily creaks. My late wife Martha taught me the value of keeping records, maintaining duplicate copies of every financial document in our old basement filing cabinet. Our only son Daniel, always restless with money, started asking for help after Martha passed, each request carrying more entitlement than gratitude. His eyes have grown calculating lately, tracking my movements through our family home as if measuring its worth. The morning draft from the basement door feels colder now, but Martha's meticulous filing system remains my quiet advantage. Those papers hold power Daniel doesn't suspect, tucked away in metal. Drawers he long ago dismissed as worthless. But let me start from the beginning. "Dad, I've been thinking," Daniel said one Sunday afternoon, his tone deliberately casual. "That big house must get pretty lonely. Why don't you come stay in my guest room for a while, just for company?" I should have noticed how his eyes didn't quite meet mine when he made the offer. But loneliness has a way of making even the suspicious parts of your heart hopeful. You know what I mean? I packed light. Just a small suitcase and the pillbox Martha had given me years ago, the one with little compartments for each day of the week. "Better than leaving your health to chance," she always said. The memory of her voice still steadies me. Daniel helped carry my bags upstairs, chattering about dinner plans, but I caught him scanning my mail stack when he thought I wasn't looking. That first evening, while we ate his microwave lasagna, the questions started flowing as smooth as wine. "So, Dad, which bank handles your pension again?" A fork paused halfway to his mouth. "First National," I answered, watching him mouth the words silently. Right. And your savings?" "That's with—" He tried to make it sound offhand. "Various places." I kept my tone light, but something in my gut tightened. I like to spread things around, you know how it is. The overhead kitchen lights seemed too bright suddenly, like spotlights in an interrogation room. Daniel leaned forward, his shadow stretching across the table. "Must be a hassle keeping track of all those accounts," he said. "Hey, I could help you simplify things. Get all those logins organized in one place." My laptop sat in its case by the guest room door. Without making a show of it, I tucked it under a sweater in the closet later that night. Maybe I was being paranoid. But caution isn't the same as mistrust. At least that's what I told myself. "We should sort out those passwords tomorrow," Daniel mentioned again before bed. "Make everything easier to manage." Sure, I nodded, non-committal. "We'll get to it." Past midnight, I heard him in the hallway, voice dropped to a whisper as he recited numbers into his phone. The sound carried through the thin walls, and my chest grew, heavy with the weight of unwanted certainty. Sometimes the worst part of discovering betrayal is realizing you saw it coming all along. The next afternoon, Daniel called up the stairs. "Dad, can you come check something with me? Got a leaky pipe in the basement that needs your expert eye." I'd fixed enough leaky pipes in my day to know that tone, false brightness covering something else entirely. But what choice did I have? Sometimes you have to walk into a trap to spring it, even when every instinct tells you to run the other way. The basement door stood open, waiting like a dark mouth ready to swallow whatever truth was about to unfold. Daniel's hand rested on the railing, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. "After you, Dad," he said, gesturing toward the stairs. "Watch your step. It's kind of dark down there." I took that first step down, feeling the old wood creak beneath my feet. You ever notice how some moments stretch out? Like time itself is trying to give you one last chance to turn back. I followed Daniel down those basement stairs, each step carrying me further from the kitchen's lingering smell of roast chicken and deeper into that familiar mix of bleach and cold concrete. You know that basement smell, the kind that reminds you of every house project you've ever tackled. "It's right over there, Dad." Daniel pointed toward the shadows near the back wall. "By the main shutoff valve. Been dripping for days." The concrete felt solid but strange under my feet, like walking on someone else's property, even though I'd helped him install these very pipes when he'd bought the place. My knees crackled a bit as I bent down to examine the joint he'd indicated. I don't see any. The sound hit me first, that hollow boom of the door swinging shut. Then came the sharp metallic punch of the bolt sliding home. My heart stumbled in my chest as I straightened up, too slowly, much too slowly. Daniel's laugh filtered through the door, but it wasn't the warm chuckle I remembered from his childhood. This was something else, cold and satisfied, like a cat that's finally cornered its prey. "Sorry, Dad, but you're just too old to be managing money anymore." His voice had changed too, harder somehow. "Don't worry. Though, I'm taking over everything. It's for your own good, really." My fists found the door before I'd even made the conscious decision to move. "Daniel, open this door right now." The wood shuddered under my hands, but held firm. "You just relax down there. I'll handle all the accounts, the house, everything. You've earned a rest, right?" His footsteps started moving away, unhurried, carrying that easy swagger of someone who thinks they own it all. "Daniel!" I slammed my palm against the door again, splinters biting into my skin. The ache in my chest wasn't just from the effort anymore. "You can't do this. I'm your father." But the only answer was the creak of floorboards above, growing fainter with each step. I ran my hands over the doorframe, searching for weak spots, but found only solid steel hinges and thick wood. Martha would have said I was being too methodical in a crisis, but checking the obvious solutions first was a habit I couldn't break. Remember that old saying about the carpenter measuring twice? Well, sometimes measuring helps you think. The basement spread out around me like a museum of forgotten things. A single bulb hung from a string in the center, casting yellow light over Daniel's old workbench. Dusty boxes lined the walls, still labeled in Martha's neat handwriting. Christmas, tax records, Daniel's school projects. The sight of her handwriting hit harder than any door slam could. "Oh, Martha," I whispered, my voice rough in the musty air. "You always said he needed firmer boundaries. Guess I should have listened." The light chose that moment to flicker once, twice, then died completely, plunging me into absolute darkness. The kind of dark that makes you forget which way is up. I stood there, feeling the weight of concrete and betrayal pressing in from all sides, my dignity crumbling like old mortar. You want to know the worst part? It wasn't the darkness or the cold or even the betrayal itself. It was remembering every time I'd praised Daniel for being clever as a kid, never imagining he'd turn that cleverness against me. Every father wants to believe the best of his son, right up until the moment that belief locks him in a basement. I felt my way to the old metal, folding chair by the workbench and sat down carefully, my hands trembling slightly. The darkness pressed against my eyes like a physical thing, and somewhere in the distance, water dripped steadily from a pipe that probably wasn't even leaking before today. My own son had just imprisoned me in his basement. The thought kept circling in my head, each lap bringing a fresh wave of humiliation. The same basement where I'd taught him to use tools, where we'd built his science fair projects, where I'd helped him install new pipes just 5 years ago. Now it was my cage, and he held the key. The absolute silence was broken only by my own breathing and that mocking drip of water. Each sound seemed to whisper the same truth. I was trapped, helpless, at the mercy of a son who'd just shown he had none. Still sitting in that darkness, I counted breaths until my eyes started to adjust. Funny how the mind works. Even in pitch black, you start picking out shapes if you wait long enough. The workbench emerged first, then the shadowy bulk of storage shelves. I stood carefully, shuffling toward where I remembered the light bulb chain hanging. My fingers brushed it on the third try, and I gave it a gentle pull. The bulb sputtered back to life, throwing a weak cone of yellow that seemed barely better than the darkness. But it was enough. You know that feeling when something you've overlooked suddenly becomes the most important thing in the room. That's what hit me when I spotted the old olive-green filing cabinet tucked in the corner. Martha's boring duplicates, she'd called them. My practical Martha, who never trusted anything important to exist in just one place. A backup plan's like an umbrella, she used to say. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. My hands were steadier now as I crossed to the cabinet. The metal was cool under my fingers, familiar from all those times I'd teased Martha about her filing system. The top drawer stuck at first. Years of disuse had that effect, but I managed to work it open with a metallic groan that seemed too loud in the confined space. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it. Manila folders labeled in her precise handwriting, house deed, bank statements, insurance, will. My throat tightened seeing those neat labels. Even now, years after losing her, Martha was still looking out for me. I carefully lifted out the deed folder first. There it was, the original copy of our house title, all the mortgage payoff documentation. The bank statements followed, showing every account number I'd built up over 50 years of careful saving. And there, in the back, was our original will, witnessed and notarized, spelling out exactly how everything should be divided. Knowledge is funny that way. Sometimes just having it is power enough. Daniel might have locked me in, but he couldn't lock away the proof of what was mine. The next few days fell into an ugly routine. Around noon, the basement door would crack open, just enough for Daniel to slide down a paper plate, usually a sandwich or some leftovers that looked like they'd been sitting out too long. He'd toss in a bottle of water like he was feeding an animal at the zoo. "Getting closer to listing day, Dad," he'd call down, voice dripping with false cheer. "You just sit tight while I handle everything." I kept quiet during these little visits, but I listened. Hard not to when sound carried so well through the floor above. Phone calls leaked down through the wooden beams, fragments about liquidating assets and staging the property. Each new conversation painted a clearer picture. Daniel wasn't just after control, he was planning to strip everything. The house, the savings, all of it. "We can close within 2 weeks," I heard him tell someone, probably a realtor. "The old man's staying with relatives now, so the place is empty." I looked at the filing cabinet in its corner, then at the concrete floor where I'd been sleeping. 2 weeks. That's how long. I had to get these documents to my lawyer before Daniel could sell my home out from under me. The concrete was cold against my back that night as I lay there, thinking through my options. Above me, Daniel's footsteps moved back and forth, like some kind of control metronome. Each step seemed to say, "I'm up here, you're down there, and that's how it's going to stay." But Martha's voice was stronger in my head. A backup plan's like an umbrella. I touched the deed folder hidden under my jacket, feeling the edges of the papers that could still save everything we'd built. Tomorrow, I decided. When daylight came through that tiny basement window, I'd start working on exactly how to get these documents into the right hands. Daniel might have the keys to the door, but I had something better. Proof of every single thing he was trying to steal. I'd lost track of days when I heard the familiar growl of Frank's mower next door. Frank had lived beside us for nearly 30 years, retired from the electric company but still fixing things for half the neighborhood. The sound got closer, then paused right by my window well. My heart kicked up. This might be my only chance. I grabbed an old paint can from the workbench and tapped it against the windowsill. Not too loud, just enough to catch attention. The mower engine cut out. Through the dusty glass I saw Frank's weathered face appear, squinting into the shadows. He wiped at the cobwebs with his sleeve. Then his eyes went wide when he spotted me. "Walt, what in blazes are you doing down there?" I pressed closer to the glass. "Frank, thank God, listen careful. I don't have much time. Daniel's locked me in here, trying to steal everything. The house, accounts, all of it." Frank's face darkened. "You're Daniel, your own son. Been down here days now. He's meeting realtors, talking about liquidating everything." The words came out in a rush, quiet but urgent. "Claims I'm staying with relatives while he sells the place out from under me. Son of a..." Frank glanced over his shoulder. "That explains the fancy car I saw in your drive yesterday. Realtor type, all dressed up. She and Daniel were walking the property, talking numbers." My stomach dropped. How long ago? 3, 4 days maybe? Overheard them saying something about closing in 2 weeks, fast-track sale. Frank's expression hardened. "But not if I have anything to say about it. What do you need, Walt?" I held up the stack of documents. "These prove everything's mine. Deed, accounts, will. Need to get them to my lawyer, but Daniel checks on me daily. If he catches wind, say no more." Frank checked his watch. "Sunset's around 8 tonight. I'll come back with my pry bar, get that window open enough to slide stuff through. Got an old canvas bag that'll work perfect." Hope flickered for the first time in days. "You'd do that? Known you 30 years, Walt. Besides," Frank's smile was grim, "somebody needs to teach that boy about karma." Just then, footsteps crossed overhead. Daniel's distinctive stride. We both froze. The steps paused, like a predator catching a scent. Frank and I held our breath. After what felt like forever, Daniel moved on, humming some tune I didn't recognize. 8 o'clock, Frank whispered. Be ready. I nodded, and he disappeared from view. The mower started up again, growing fainter as he finished his yard. Not 10 minutes later, Daniel's footsteps returned to the basement door. The bolt scraped back. Having a good day down there, Dad? His voice dripped false concern. Thought, you might like to know I've got a final surprise coming soon. Something that'll make everything official. He chuckled. Don't worry your old head about the details. Just know I'm handling it all. The bolt slammed home again. I clutched Martha's documents closer, wondering what new scheme he was cooking up. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I had more than just papers. I had hope. 8 o'clock couldn't come fast enough. Frank was right about karma. And Daniel was about to learn that lesson the hard way. You know that feeling when you're waiting for something important and time seems to crawl? Well, multiply that by about 1,000 when you're stuck in a basement. I'd learned to time my breathing to the laugh tracks drifting down from Daniel's TV shows upstairs. One breath per audience chuckle, trying to keep my nerves steady. The filing cabinet drawer squeaked a bit as I eased it open. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but 50 years of precision work teaches you patience. Remember those Saturday mornings when Martha would sort through papers, saying, "Better safe than sorry, Walter"? The memory of her voice steadied me as I pulled out folder after folder. I laid everything out on the workbench: deed, insurance policies, bank statements, pension documents, our whole life in manila folders. The twine I found coiled in an old toolbox wasn't pretty, but it would hold. My fingers remembered the knots from decades of securing lumber loads. Over, under, pull tight, double back. The basement window filtered the day's dying light, throwing long shadows across the concrete floor. Right on time I heard the soft scrape of the window grate being lifted. Frank's whisper came down clear as a bell. "Walt, you ready? Ready as I'll ever be," I whispered back, clutching the packet. A thin clothesline snaked down through the gap. Frank always did think ahead. I clipped the bundle securely, testing the knot twice. Funny how your hands can shake even when you know exactly what you're doing. "Nice and slow now," Frank murmured. The line went taut, and I watched our life's paperwork rise inch by inch toward freedom. My heart nearly stopped when the packet caught on a nail, but Frank worked it free without a sound. A minute later, the line came back down with a folded note. Frank's handwriting was as precise as his electrical work. "First appointment with Stevens and Moore, 8 a.m. sharp. Count on me." 2 taps means all clear. 2 soft knocks followed. I pocketed the note where Daniel wouldn't find it during his checks. Now came the part that made my hands sweat, covering our tracks. I'd gathered old phone books and instruction manuals from around the basement, stuffing them into the drawer to maintain the weight. Each folder I'd removed got replaced with similar-looking junk. To Daniel's quick glance, it would look untouched. Martha's voice again. "Details matter, Walter. They're what separate a job from a craft." I wiped down every metal surface I'd touched, then used an old rag to sweep away my footprints near the window. The concrete dust had been like a record of every move I'd made, but not anymore. The TV upstairs was playing one of those medical shows Daniel liked, all dramatic music and life-or-death stakes. The drill he'd been using earlier started up again, probably hanging something in what he already thought of as his house. Then the TV cut off mid-scene. The sudden silence hit like a slap. My breathing stopped as Daniel's boots crossed the living room floor. They paused at the top of the basement stairs. The deadbolt rasped, not opening, just testing. I could almost feel him standing there, wondering if something was off. His phone rang, shattering the moment. One of those generic ringtones, not a saved contact. "Hello?" Daniel's voice was guarded. "Yes, this is Daniel Hale. Tomorrow? No, I can't meet that early. Make it afternoon." His footsteps moved away from the door, voice fading as he headed toward his office. "Yes, I understand the paperwork needs—" "No, that won't be a problem." I let out the breath I'd been holding. One more night. One night for those documents to get where they needed to go. I settled onto my makeshift bed, just a pile of old moving blankets, and closed my eyes. Martha would have been proud of me today. Not for the deception, maybe, but for fighting back. For not letting our life's work be stolen by the very person we'd raised to know better. The drill started up again overhead, its whine burrowing into the quiet like it was trying to drill straight through my nerves. But for the first time in days, The sound didn't bother me as much. Sometimes the most important victories are the quiet ones. Morning light filtered through the grimy window well, drawing lines across the concrete floor. I'd barely slept, my ears tuned for any sound from above. The basement's musty air had become almost familiar now. Funny how even a prison can start feeling routine if you're in it long enough. Have you ever noticed how time moves differently when you're waiting for something crucial? Each minute stretched like taffy, but I kept counting them anyway. 8 o'clock came and went. 8:15, 8:30. My throat felt like I'd swallowed sandpaper. Then, at exactly 8:47, I'd been watching my old wind-up watch, like it might explode. I heard Frank's voice carry across the yard. He was talking to someone about his tomato plants, but I caught the words clear enough. All squared away at the office this morning. The relief hit me so hard, I had to sit down on my makeshift bed. The documents were safe. The truth was out. I took a deep breath, and the basement's iron and dust taste didn't seem quite so bitter. Around noon, Daniel's Boots announced his return from whatever errand he'd been running. He was talking on his phone, voice raised in that way people do when they're trying to sound important. "No, that's not acceptable," he was saying. "I don't care if your legal department needs more time. The listing can't wait." A pause. "Well, tell them to work faster. I've got papers in motion already." I could picture him pacing overhead, probably running his hand through his hair the way he did when things weren't going his way. Just like when he was 10 and couldn't understand why I wouldn't buy him that expensive gaming console all his friends had. His phone beeped with a voicemail, and he played it on speaker. A woman's crisp voice filled the space. "Mr. Hale, this is Jessica from Cornerstone Realty. Just confirming we're scheduled for staging photos this Friday. Please ensure the property is ready by—" My stomach tightened. Friday. Not 2 weeks anymore, just days. I closed my eyes and started arranging the story in my head, getting it ready for when the lawyer called. Had to keep it clean, organized. No emotion, just facts. First, Daniel invited me to stay, then locked me in the basement. Second, he declared himself in charge of my finances. Third, he planned to sell my house without consent. Fourth, the duplicate documents prove everything. I repeated it like a mantra, keeping each point sharp and clear. Martha used to say the truth was like a good tool. It worked best when you kept it simple and well-maintained. The basement door rattled, pulling me from my thoughts. The bolt scraped back, and Daniel's shadow fell across the stairs. "Big day tomorrow," he called down, not bothering to come all the way down. "We're having our first showing. I expect you'll behave yourself?" The question had teeth in it. "I'll be quiet as a mouse," I said, trying to match his casual tone. No point letting him know anything was different. "Good." The door closed again, the bolt sliding home with its now familiar sound. I looked at my watch, then at the window where Frank had helped launch our counterattack. The lawyer had the proof now, but would they move fast enough? Real estate deals can move like lightning when there's money pushing them. I'd seen it happen before, back when the Williams place got snapped up in just 3 days. The afternoon sun crept across the floor while I sat on my blankets, marking time. Each hour brought Friday's staging closer, but it also brought whatever the lawyer was setting in motion. It was like watching 2 trains heading for the same crossing. The question was which one would get there first. Daniel's footsteps moved around overhead, probably clearing things for tomorrow's showing. Every now and then his phone would ring and he'd step into his office where I couldn't hear the conversation. The not knowing gnawed at me worse than the hunger ever did. Late afternoon hit me like a physical weight. Maybe it was the dim light, or maybe just hours of tension finally collecting their due, but my knees gave out. I found myself sitting on the cold concrete, joints screaming at me for all the abuse they'd taken these past days. You ever notice how shame has a temperature? It bloomed hot in my chest, crawling up my neck as the reality of my situation sank in deeper than it had before. Here I was, 75 years old, locked in my own basement like some misbehaving child. The home Martha and I had built together, where we'd raised Daniel, where she'd tended her roses until the day she couldn't anymore. It had become my prison. "I'm sorry, Martha," I whispered to the shadows. "I'm so sorry, honey, I let him turn our home into this." My voice cracked on the words. Maybe I should just sign whatever he wants. Maybe that's what being old means. Letting go before you're ready. The concrete seemed to leach every bit of warmth from my bones. I pressed my palms against the floor, feeling the grit under my fingers, and for a moment, I truly considered surrendering, just giving Daniel what he wanted, letting him win. "Walter?" Frank's whisper cut through my fog of self-pity. "You there?" I crawled over to the window, my knees protesting every inch. "I'm here. Good news. Just got back from the lawyer's office. Those duplicates, pure gold. They've already prepared the filings and I signed a sworn statement about finding you locked down there." My breath caught. They believed everything. Every word. But listen, Daniel's getting antsy. I saw him pacing on his phone earlier, arguing with someone. Whatever he's planning, it might happen soon. "You ready for that?" I straightened my back, Martha's voice in my head reminding me that hails don't break, they bend and spring back stronger. I ran through the sequence again, the imprisonment, the financial threats, the sale attempts, the proof. Clean and clear, just like I'd practiced. In my mind, I could see it playing out. A sheriff standing in our front hall reading charges while Daniel's smug certainty crumbled. The thought steadied me. "I'm ready," I told Frank. "But hold on a minute." I made my way to the workbench, where I'd noticed a loose floorboard earlier. It took some doing, but I managed to pry it up enough to slip the original will underneath. If Daniel got suspicious and searched down here, at least that would be safe. What was that? Noise? Frank whispered. "Insurance," I answered. But before I could explain further, a shadow fell across the window well. Daniel's shoes appeared at the edge, and Frank's presence vanished like morning dew. The basement door opened. "Hope you're feeling cooperative," Daniel called down. "Tomorrow's a big day. We're going to sign some papers that'll end all this argument once and for all." My fingers found the edge of the floorboard again, and I gripped it hard. The rough wood helped ground me as Daniel's footsteps retreated. I stayed there for a while, one hand on that loose board hiding the will, the other pressed against my chest where Martha's wedding ring hung on a chain under my shirt. The lawyer had the evidence. Frank had given his statement. The truth was working its way through proper channels. All I had to do now was hold on and remember, hails don't break. I jerked awake to the sound of metal on metal, keys jingling like some jailer's morning rounds. The familiar rhythm of Daniel's dress shoes clicked down the first 2 steps, each tap marking another piece of my dignity he thought he could steal. You know that feeling when someone's so sure they've won that they can't help showing off? That's exactly how Daniel looked, standing there with his $1,000 suit and that smirk I used to warn him about when he was little. "Good morning, Dad," he called down, waving a cream-colored document just out of reach. "Sleep well on your concrete bed?" My joints screamed as I pushed myself up to sitting, but I kept my face neutral. No sense giving him the satisfaction. "I brought you something special." He held the paper where the weak morning light caught it. "A nice, clean new will, one that makes sure everything goes to the responsible son who's looking out for his father's best interests." His smile turned sharp. "Amazing what a notary will sign when you explain about age-related confusion. Martha used to handle all our important papers. She had an eye for details that I never matched. But living with her for 50 years taught me a few things. As Daniel shifted his weight, preening, I studied what I could see of the document. The margins looked wrong somehow. The initials weren't quite lined up right. And there, the date was off by 1 number, like someone had written it down from memory instead of copying it exactly. The window behind me vibrated softly. From the corner of my eye, I caught Frank's phone screen pressed against the glass. 1 word. "Ready." My stomach churned with a rage so pure it almost choked me. 50 years of working honest hours, paying honest bills, building an honest life. And here was my own flesh and blood, waving forgery in my face like it was his graduation diploma. But Martha's voice whispered in my memory, "Evidence before emotion, Walter. Let them talk themselves into trouble." I swallowed back everything I wanted to say, and instead focused on memorizing every detail for the lawyer. The paper stock, the misaligned stamp, the way Daniel's attempt at my signature tilted left when mine always slanted right. "That's quite a document," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Must be airtight if you're so confident. Why don't you read me the part about immediate transfer of authority? The exact wording, I mean." Daniel's grin widened. He loved an audience, always had. "Oh, it's beautiful. Crystal clear about how all assets transfer to me as soon as—" He caught himself, but not before I heard what I needed. Intent to steal, right from his own mouth. He tucked the papers under his arm, smoothing his tie with his free hand. "Actually, I'll let you think about it. Still need to sign the last page after lunch anyway." He straightened his shoulders, already imagining himself master of all he surveyed. Plenty of time for you to appreciate your situation. I watched him climb back up, each step carrying the weight of his satisfaction. The bolt slid home with its now familiar click. Somewhere above, a clock chimed 11. I pressed my hand against the cool concrete wall and felt the vibration of Frank's soft tap through the window. The forged will was the final piece we needed, proof of premeditated fraud to go with the false imprisonment and attempted theft. Each stroke of Daniel's pen had drawn him deeper into his own trap. Martha would have seen the poetry in it. Daniel's greed, doing my work for me. I settled back to wait, our old kitchen timer ticking in my memory. Martha had always said timing was everything, whether you were baking bread or springing a trap. I was sitting on that old wooden stool by the workbench when I heard it, the first faint wail of sirens somewhere across town. You know that sound, right? How it can either fill you with dread or hope, depending on which side of justice you're standing on. My hands were steady as I arranged Martha's duplicate files in a neat row. The deed to the house. On top, then bank statements, pension documents, and that original will I'd pulled from under the floorboard. Each paper was a brick in the wall Daniel had built around himself. The sirens grew louder, then cut off suddenly. A car engine purred at idle right outside my house. Above me, Daniel was still humming some tune I didn't recognize, probably reviewing his forged masterpiece one last time. 2 quick taps on the window made me turn. Frank's face appeared in that dusty rectangle of glass, and he mouthed the words clear as day. They're here. Behind him, I caught the shadow of someone else moving across my front lawn. Had to be the lawyer, given that deliberate walk. You ever notice how time seems to slow down when you're waiting for something big? I could hear every tick of my watch, every creak of the house settling. I'd spent 50 years learning every sound this place could make. Now those familiar noises were like an old friend keeping me company while I waited. I ran through my statement again in my head. Just the facts, clean and simple, the way Martha always insisted on doing our taxes. Imprisoned in basement since, I checked my watch one more time to be exact, Tuesday afternoon, approximately 2:15 p.m. Threatened with theft of assets. Forged will presented this morning at the knock upstairs cut through my rehearsal. 3 solid raps, official-like. Professional patience in every tap. Daniel's humming stopped mid-note. I heard his footsteps cross the living room. Those expensive shoes he'd bought himself as an early inheritance, he'd said. The front door opened with its characteristic squeal. Martha had always wanted me to oil those hinges, but right now that small sound helped me track exactly what was happening above. Good afternoon, sir? A deep voice, calm and formal. Sheriff's Department, and this is Mr. Harrison from Harrison & Pike Legal Services. Another voice cut in. My lawyer. Good man. Daniel's laugh floated down through the floorboards, that fake, charming one he used when trying to talk his way out of trouble since he was 10. There must be some mistake. I was just about to call you about listing the property. We have some questions about your father, Mr. Hale. The sheriff's voice had that steel-edged good lawmen get when they know they're dealing with someone guilty, and about certain financial documents. More footsteps, at least 3 sets, moving from the porch into the front hall. I knew exactly where they were, 12 feet from the basement door with that loose floorboard I never fixed marking the halfway point. It creaked right on cue. Daniel's voice turned brittle. My father's resting. He's been confused lately. I have papers here that... The papers we're interested in, my lawyer interrupted, are the originals Mrs. Hale filed with our office, the ones that don't quite match what you've been showing around town. I gripped the workbench edge, feeling the familiar worn spots where Martha used to lean while we worked on projects together. The basement seemed too quiet now, like it was holding its breath along with me. Footsteps moved closer to the basement door. The bolt lifted with a metallic scratch that echoed off the concrete walls. I closed my eyes for just a moment, sending a quick thank you to Martha for her meticulous record-keeping and to Frank for being the kind of neighbor they don't make much anymore. I opened my eyes and squared my shoulders, documents lined up like soldiers on the workbench beside me. Any second now, that door would open, and I'd see daylight from upstairs pour down these steps for the first time in days. I had dates memorized, times noted, and evidence arranged. I was ready. The door hinges creaked. Daniel Andrew Hale imprisoned me here Tuesday afternoon at approximately 2:15 p.m., I said. my voice steady as the door swung wide. Light from upstairs spilled down the stairs, making me squint. He's been attempting to liquidate my accounts and forge documents to steal my home. The sheriff's silhouette filled the doorframe, Daniel's shorter shadow hovering behind him. I gestured to the olive-green filing cabinet. My late wife Martha kept duplicate records of everything in there. The original will is under that loose floorboard by the workbench. I hid it there yesterday when Daniel mentioned his final surprise. You know that moment when you've been carrying something heavy for so long, and suddenly someone else takes the weight. That's how it felt when Mr. Harrison, my lawyer, stepped past the sheriff and down into my concrete cage. His briefcase looked exactly like the one Martha used to tease him about 20 years ago, worn leather that had seen its share of battles. "Mr. Hale," Harrison said, pulling out a stack of certified papers, "I have here the documentation you and Martha filed with our office, including the original will dated March 15th, 2022. He turned to face the stairs. "Daniel, would you care to explain the different version you've been showing to realtors?" "This is ridiculous," Daniel snapped, but his voice had that wobble I remembered from when he'd break something as a kid and try to lie about it. "Dad's confused. I have a perfectly legal—" "The will you're holding," the sheriff cut in. "When exactly did your father sign it?" Daniel fumbled with the papers under his arm. Last week. The notary came by and—" "Which notary?" Harrison asked quietly. "Because I have here a sworn statement from your father's neighbor, Frank Miller, testifying that you've kept Mr. Hale locked in this basement for days. Rather difficult to arrange a proper notary meeting under those circumstances." I watched Daniel's face do something I hadn't seen since he was caught stealing from his mother's purse at 13. That flash of panic when all the clever plans start crumbling. His eyes darted to the papers in his hands, like they might suddenly rewrite themselves. "Section 18.4.3 of the State Code," the sheriff said, every word measured, "makes it a felony to forge financial documents or coerce signatures under duress." He held out his hand. "Please place those papers on the step, Mr. Hale." The rustle of papers hitting wood sounded like autumn leaves falling. Harrison picked them up, held them side by side with his copies, and nodded to the sheriff. "The signatures don't match. The date format is inconsistent with your father's standard practice, and there's a peculiar slant to the initials that—" The quick silver flash of handcuffs made me blink. Daniel's expensive shoes stumbled on the steps as the sheriff began. "You have the right to remain silent." A deputy I hadn't noticed before started photographing. The basement door, the lock, the empty water bottles Daniel had tossed down. The camera's flash turned everything stark and evidentiary. I took my first real breath in days, feeling my lungs expand fully. The musty basement air suddenly seemed clearer, lighter somehow. Daniel's eyes caught mine as the sheriff guided him up the stairs, those same blue eyes he'd inherited from me, now desperate for rescue, like when he was small and in trouble. But he wasn't small anymore. And this wasn't a scraped knee or a broken window that Dad could fix. This was a grown man's choices coming home to roost. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law," the sheriff continued from upstairs. "You have the right to an attorney." Daniel's gaze swept the basement one last time, searching for something. Maybe an excuse, maybe forgiveness, maybe just a way out. But there was nothing down here but concrete truth, and 50 years of his father's patient record-keeping. The front lawn waited through the open door, green and ordinary, while Miranda Wrights echoed in the front hall. I followed Harrison and the deputy up those basement stairs, my knees creaking from days on concrete. Each step felt like climbing back into my own life. Funny how you don't realize how much your house means until someone tries to take it from you. Through the front windows, red and blue lights painted the neighborhood in urgent colors. Mrs. Peterson from across the street stood on her lawn in her gardening hat, one hand pressed to her mouth. The Rodriguez kids had stopped their basketball game to stare. Even old Bill Thompson had wheeled himself onto his front porch to see what all the commotion was about. I hadn't wanted this kind of attention. Martha and I had always been private people, the kind who'd wave to neighbors but keep our business to ourselves. Now here I was, the afternoon's entertainment, emerging from my own basement while my son got arrested on our front lawn. Frank stood at the bottom of the walkway, arms crossed, watching Daniel getting settled in the back of the cruiser. When Frank caught my eye, he gave me this single firm nod that said more than 1,000 words could. That's the thing about good neighbors. They show up when it matters. The whispers started floating around like autumn leaves. Did you hear? Kept him locked in the basement. Tried to forge the will. Selling the house right out from under him. Daniel must have heard them too. I watched his face change as the sheriff guided him toward the car. That cocky smile he'd worn while tossing water bottles down the basement stairs. Gone. Now he just looked, small, grimacing as the cuffs bit into his wrists. Each neighbor's stare seemed to chip away at whatever was left of his pride. Mr. Hale? Harrison touched my elbow, holding up a small evidence bag. The sheriff released this back to you. It's the original house key they found in Daniel's desk. My fingers trembled a bit as I took it. The metal felt cool and familiar. The same key that had lived in my pocket for 30 years until Daniel suggested I take a break from home maintenance. The emergency motions are already filed, Harrison continued, his voice low and steady. Any attempt at sale or transfer will be blocked. The house and accounts are secure. I nodded, breathing in deep. The old eucalyptus hedge Martha had planted along the walkway still gave off that clean, sharp scent she loved so much. The air tasted different now, like the first cold drink of water after being thirsty too long. Thank you, Frank, I said as my neighbor stepped closer, for hearing me, for believing me. Wasn't much of a choice there, Walt, Frank replied, scratching his neck. Man knows right from wrong, that's all. The cruiser's door thumped shut. Through the window I could see Daniel staring straight ahead, jaw clenched, looking nothing like the boy who used to help Martha plant her roses every spring. I turned back toward my front door, and ran my hand along the banister. Martha had polished this wood every Sunday for 20 years, humming while she worked. The house seemed to exhale around me, like it too had been holding its breath these past few days. The door closed with a soft click that echoed through rooms that were mine again. Standing there in my own foyer, I looked out the side window at the empty planter on the porch, the one Martha always filled, with something bright and alive. The soil sat bare and waiting, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. The next morning, I was out on my porch before the paperboy made his rounds. Dawn painted the sky in watercolor pinks and golds, the kind of sunrise Martha used to admire from her favorite kitchen chair. In my hand I held her old garden trowel, the one with the wooden handle worn smooth from years of use. You know that feeling when you're exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what needs doing. That's how it felt kneeling there on the weathered boards of my front porch, working the trowel into the empty planter box. The loam still smelled rich and alive, even after sitting untended these past months. I'd found Martha's rosebush in the garage the night before, tucked away in the corner where she'd stored her gardening supplies. She'd been nursing that plant along for years, taking cuttings each spring to start new ones. This was her last cutting, wrapped in damp newspaper and waiting patiently in its plastic pot. The soil parted easily under the trowel. My knees complained a bit. Concrete floors will do that to you, but I barely noticed. Each turn of earth felt like setting something right again. I dug until the hole was just so, remembering how Martha always said plants were like people. They needed room to grow, but also something solid to lean on. Movement caught my eye, Mrs. Peterson's curtain twitching next door. Can't say I blamed her curiosity. Yesterday's drama had rewritten everything they thought they knew about the quiet Hale family. Daniel's arrest wasn't just neighborhood gossip anymore. It was courthouse records and police reports, the kind of fall from grace that sticks to a name. The cruiser pulling away had drawn every eye on the block. Even now I could feel the weight of those stares, some filled with pity, others with that particular hunger for scandal that feeds on whispered conversations over back fences. Daniel had built himself quite a reputation here over the years, always ready with a smooth word or a helping hand. Now they'd seen the truth behind that smile, and there's no unseeing such things. I lifted Martha's rosebush from its temporary pot, careful not to disturb the roots she'd tended so lovingly. The plant looked small but determined, its stems reaching up like fingers stretching toward light. Setting it into its new home felt like closing a circle somehow. Harrison, my lawyer, had stopped by earlier with papers to sign. We'd used the porch railing as a makeshift desk, the morning air still cool enough to raise goosebumps. His pen scratched across page after page, each signature another wall between Daniel and what he'd tried to steal. Bank accounts, property titles, power of attorney, all locked down tight now. The damage stopped here, contained like water in a dam. You're not just protecting yourself, Harrison had said, straightening the stack of papers. You're protecting everyone who might have been next. I worked the soil around the rosebush's base, making sure each root had proper contact. Martha always said the secret was in how you settled them in. Too loose and they'd never take hold, too tight and they'd strangle. Just like raising children, she'd say, though that thought carried a different weight now. The old copper watering can stood ready, filled from the spigot that had watered every plant Martha ever grew here. I poured carefully, watching the dark soil turn darker still until water beaded on leaves and the earth breathed that deep green smell of possibility. Standing wasn't as easy as kneeling had been, but I managed. The house key sat solid in my pocket, its familiar weight a reminder that some things couldn't be taken. Not really, not when you held on to what mattered. Looking down at that small bush, no bigger than my forearm but already reaching for the sky, I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace exactly, but something closer to dignity, like slipping on a well-worn coat and finding it still fits just right. You know what, Martha? I said softly, touching one green leaf. Greed buries itself deeper than any basement.